Hey, Eric Salahub here, your online instructional coach, and I'm going to take about an hour probably to do this screencast where I'm going to talk about how to address plagiarism and academic dishonesty in online classes. This is certainly not only something that online teachers are interested in, but this presentation is focused specifically on online classes. Please reach out to me if you want to talk about anything I mention here. If this is something that you're worried about in your classes, let me know. If you run into this and you need, someone to, debrief with or talk about problems and solutions with, you can certainly reach out to me. As your coach, I'm happy to talk about anything going on in your classes, and I'd be happy to do that. I guess most specifically, the main thing I'm going to talk about in this presentation is what can we actually do to help prevent or minimize cheating and academic dishonesty. And so if you want to talk about how to implement some of the things that I mentioned here, I'm happy to do that. So let's move on. I'm going to minimize, let's get rid of myself here. A little bit about the research that I've done. This is something I've been interested in, as long as I've been a teacher in my own classes. I started doing research into plagiarism specifically back when I was working with writing across the curriculum. I've also spent time on the administrator side as a department chair and online lead, and in my time on the online leadership team in my role as coach. I've talked to all of our deans of student services. I've served on student discipline consultation team here at Larimer. So I think I know quite a bit about cheating and academic dishonesty as it happens at Front Range. And in terms of the research I did specifically for this presentation, you can look online for Donald McCabe at the Center for Academic Integrity, or you might do a Amazon search or a Google search for a book called Cheating Lessons by Dr. James Lang. An awesome book, and really the kind of philosophy that I end up presenting here in how to deal with cheating and academic dishonesty really rings true with everything that Dr. James Lang says. So I'm a huge fan of Dr. Lang. I did a survey last semester, and I guess maybe last year, 2015, asking Front Range faculty, staff, instructors, and also faculty and staff and instructors from other institutions to talk about their thoughts and feelings about academic dishonesty. If you want to follow that SurveyMonkey link, you can see the results that I got or reach out to me, and I'm happy to share with you. Why do we care about online cheating or about cheating on online classes or about plagiarism and academic dishonesty in general? I'm not sure why you care, but these are the four most common answers that come up when I've talked to colleagues about this. We take it personally. We think it undermines student learning. We think it's morally wrong, and we just don't want to live in a world full of cheaters. A couple of questions for you to stop and think about. So if you want to pause and think, or just keep these questions in mind as we move forward. Do you think cheating and plagiarism are more common today compared to the past? If you had to guess what percentage of high school and college students admit to cheating in the past year, where would we be? Somewhere A, B, C, or D. What do you think? And would you say that the research shows that cheating is more common in online classes compared to face-to-face classes? And if you're ready for some answers, we'll move forward. Well, I hope you picked answer D. Unfortunately, when they are surveyed, high school and college students, around 75% of them admit to cheating at least once. Surveys different. Some of them say in the past year, someone said, in your career in college or in high school. But a significant percentage of high school and college students admit to cheating. And no, cheating is not more common today. It has held relatively steady for more than 50 years. I saw a few surveys, a few bits of research that shows the numbers have ticked up a few single digits over the past 20 years. But nonetheless, cheating is something that has been happening in school pretty much forever, and it is a perennial problem that we're still dealing with today. I found very little evidence. In fact, I found no evidence really that cheating is more common in online classes compared to face-to-face classes. Again, I saw some anecdotes about that, but in terms of actual research documenting it, I didn't find any. We'll talk a little bit later. If cheating were to be more common in online classes, it's probably has to do with some of the contextual factors, and really not because it's an online class. I don't think we should feel good about this. Cheating is really prominent everywhere, and it probably is fairly prominent in online classes as well. Just a quick look at some research done at Iowa State University about how students rationalize cheating. As a philosopher who, is interested in how people are motivated, and as someone who teaches ethics, I found the study really enlightening. I don't think when students talk about the reasons they cheat, it's not a justification, it's really an explanation. It might be how students talk to themselves about cheating, and that might be worth thinking about. So in this case, there was a business class with homework problem sets, and the answers actually appeared online, and most students actually accessed those answers. And so the College of Business, they weren't, they really wanted to know why. So they just wanted to know why students cheated. And here are some of the things the students said. They weren't cheaters, they just were good students who happened to do something wrong. They blamed the professor for not being more clear about what constituted cheating. You never said we couldn't access online homework, or you should have known that if the problem answers were online, we would find them, or you should have known that we would collaborate and share answers with each other. They cited the fact that, well, everyone else in class was doing it, so most people think it's fine to use the internet. This is how the real world operates. If the answers are out there, you should expect us to find them. Many of the students actually thought that quote-unquote cheating helped them learn, and so in that context they saw it as something positive as opposed to negative. And this last item down here, this is something I saw in quite a bit of the research. Students really think about two sides of cheating in a different way. They think if they help someone cheat by providing answers, or I don't know, helping write a paper, or even doing someone's homework for them, they consider that positive because they're helping someone. The research calls that pro-social cheating. Maybe parents feel good when they do their kids' homework for the same reason. So students are distinguishing the student who asks for help, or the student who copies off someone's paper. That student is doing something more wrong than the student who is the supplier of the answers, which I think psychologically is interesting. You may think about the most recent time that you cheated, and since this is a web video, you can actually admit to yourself that you have cheated. And I guess I'd just like you to think about, why did you do it? And assuming you got caught, or if you did get caught, how would you have rationalized that act of cheating? Or just to yourself. How do you justify that, or explain it, or rationalize it to yourself? I don't want to burst your bubble, but students are humans, and we are too. So my sense is that we probably cheat at a similar rate to what students do, and we probably rationalize things in similar ways. For copyright reasons, I'm not going to actually show this video clip, but if I can entice you to go to Google and do a search for Dan Ariely. This is actually a 20-minute TED Talk called Our Buggy Moral Code. Dan Ariely is behavioral economist, and he's done a lot of research into cheating and what would entice people to cheat more or less. And I'm going to do a 60-second synopsis of what Ariely finds. There is not a small group of humans who are cheaters. Almost everyone will cheat if they're in the right circumstances, and the context can actually increase or decrease cheating, again, for pretty much everybody involved. We can create contexts where almost no one will cheat, and we can create contexts where almost everyone will cheat. As an economist, you might imagine Ariely really thinks about cheating as a cost-benefit analysis. So if I've piqued your interest, go do a Google search and watch this great TED Talk from Dan Ariely. And if you want to talk about it, reach out to me. I am very intrigued by Ariely's research, and some of what he has to say has really informed kind of my take on how we can preempt cheating and plagiarism. So there are probably a few students who will cheat as much as they can, pathological cheaters. There are probably some small subset of students who will never cheat no matter what, but almost everyone else is probably somewhere in the middle. They will cheat in the right circumstances, and they're more likely to cheat in some circumstances as opposed to other circumstances. So we're going to look at three things. We can look at demographics. What does it tell us about the types of students who are more or less likely to cheat? We can look at personal factors. What personality traits or individual traits among individual students lead them to be more or less likely to cheat? And then what are these external or contextual factors that might be related to whether students cheat or not and the extent to which they will cheat? Well, we can look at demographics of not just online students, but we can look at demographics of students in general and those that are more or less likely to cheat. So this is what the research shows. Men self-report cheating more than women. Younger students cheat more than older students, and it's pretty much linear. Freshmen in high school cheat less than seniors in high school. Seniors in high school cheat, freshmen in high school cheat more than seniors in high school. Freshmen in high school cheat more than students in college. Students in grad school cheat less. So as you get older and as you move up through the educational system, you're less likely to cheat. Struggling students, but also the high performers, most likely to cheat. Sorority and fraternity students, which we don't have to worry about at Front Range, more likely to cheat or more likely to admit to cheating. And the higher the workload, the more likely it is that students cheat. Now, if we look at the demographics of online students, that might help us figure out if cheating in online classes just based on demographics is more or less likely. At Front Range Community College, our online demographics are skewed toward older students, skewed toward female students. When it comes to struggling and high achievers, we're pretty much across the board, but I will say almost every student in an online class is pretty much like a new college student. They're also maybe likely to have higher workloads. So again, there may be some demographic factors that would lead online students to be more likely to cheat, but I just don't know what we can really do with this stuff because, demographics really don't tell us anything about individual students. So I'm certainly not suggesting we stereotype students. Well, what about personal factors? If we just look at personality traits or personal factors, character traits and whatnot, what are the things that lead students to be dishonest or lead students to be more likely to be dishonest? And so the research that I've done looks at these factors. To the extent that students have these factors, they may be more likely to cheat in your class. If they're extrinsically motivated, if they have low self-efficacy, what does that mean? They lack the ability to know whether they're competent or not. If they can't do the work, they're more likely to cheat. If they view you, the teacher, as incompetent and or uncaring, they're more likely to cheat. If they think cheating is a norm, they're more likely to do it. If they're not sure what constitutes cheating, they're more likely to cheat. And the better they are able to rationalize cheating as something that's morally or pragmatically necessary, they're more likely to cheat. So our online students are much more like first-generation college students than typical Front Range students. Many of them are first-generation college students, and so they may have low self-efficacy simply because they're new to college, and they may not have a good ability to judge how competent they are with the material. If they're in an online class, they may be even further removed from that ability to judge their competence with the material. And if they're new to college, they may not be able to do the work. In an online class, they may be more likely to view you, the teacher, as incompetent or uncaring. Not because you are, but because it is more difficult to demonstrate your competence in an online class because students don't get to see you. All they see is the course site. So it's the same thing with caring. I imagine you do care about your students, but it may be more difficult for your online students to perceive you as a caring teacher. Maybe students believe that cheating is more common in online learning, and if they believe that, they may be more likely to do it. Online students may be further removed from what's happening on campus. They may not read the student code of conduct. They may not read the syllabus. They may have just less exposure to the norms at Front Range, and so they may not know what constitutes cheating. They may not understand what constitutes plagiarism. So there may be factors that lead some online students to be more likely to cheat. And it may be easier to cheat in an online class. And so if it is, that could be a problem. So what do we do with this information? I would say ignore the demographics information. I think it's interesting, but we don't want to stereotype students. Even if it's true that men are more likely to cheat than women, that doesn't tell us anything about particular men or women in your classes. So I'm just going to say, as someone who teaches logic, we don't want to stereotype. There's really nothing that demographic information tells us about particular students in your classes. And I don't know what we can do about those personal factors either. We can't necessarily read a student's personality. We can't get inside their head. So I think it's worth looking at these personal factors. But again, I don't want to judge students based on our perception of those factors. So there are lots of things about student cheating that we can't control. We can't control students' attitudes. We can't control the demographics in our classes. But there may be things that we can control, and the things we can control might have an impact on those personal factors. For instance, maybe we can do something to let students know that we care about them. Maybe we can do something to make sure that students are really aware of what we count as cheating or plagiarism in our classes. So I'm really interested in talking about how do we prevent or minimize cheating. And I don't think we can prevent all cheating, or maybe even most cheating, but I do think we can design our institutions, our courses, and our assignments to make cheating less likely. To me, this is where the rubber hits the road, right? What can we actually do proactively to make our classes the sorts of places where students are less likely to cheat? We can also implement specific interventions to curb cheating on homework exams and in essays and papers. So I'm going to spend the rest of the time in this presentation, 45 minutes or so, talking specifically about external factors that promote cheating, right? What are these contextual or external factors, external to the student, that promote cheating? And what I have highlighted here is cheating is easy and getting caught is unlikely. That's probably the first thing that jumps to mind. How do I actually make it more difficult for students to cheat? And how do I catch them when they do cheat? So we're going to talk about some specifics. A lot of these other types of things I want to talk about are more theory-based, and so I want to whet your appetite for some specific things that we can do to make cheating more difficult and to catch students when they do cheat. But I really think some of these other kind of theoretical issues are more important, and you'll see why. So maybe this is fixes versus solutions. A couple of quotes from Dr. James Lang, and he's the person who wrote that book called Cheating Lessons. Dr. Lang says, rates of cheating have remained pretty much steady for more than 50 years. If you're just looking for quick fixes, it's unlikely that you're going to come up with something that all the smart teachers over the last 5 decades have failed to come up with. This is a perennial problem. It is unlikely that there are some immediate fixes that are going to change the landscape of cheating significantly. According to Dr. Lang, his findings, and some of the things we're going to talk about today, he says point to what he calls a radical proposition. It's the very nature of the education that we provide in college to our students. It's the design of the education. It's the delivery of the education. Those are the deepest causes of cheating on campus, right? We are causing or allowing this cheating to happen based on the way we have designed the education at the institutional and course level. Cheating rates may be so high because we are simply designing our curriculums and our courses for cheating. We don't want to do that. So the first one I want to talk about in terms of external factors that promote honest. So let's look at, I've been talking about things that promote cheating. We can flip them either way, right? So let's talk about factors that promote honesty. When a student is extrinsically motivated, they are more likely to cheat. And I'm sorry if my slide here is confusing. I don't want to be confusing here. Extrinsic motivation is something that leads students to be more likely to cheat. Intrinsic motivation is something that leads students to be less likely to cheat. So what we want to do is we want to try to move students from extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation. Let me back up a slide here. I was talking about this case study, and everyone here is Front Range Community College person. If you've been around for a while, you know we've been talking about assessment of student learning, assessment of student learning outcomes, assessment of instructional practices. We've been doing that for lots of years. And I can say that in previous iterations of our assessment project, we were extrinsically motivated. We were told that we needed to do assessment because we needed to answer to the state legislature, or we needed to answer to the Higher Learning Commission who was going to do our accreditation. We didn't necessarily find the assessment we were doing to be something we honestly cared about. We thought we had to do it to jump through hoops. And as you might guess, when we were jumping through hoops, I am not confident at all that the assessment we were doing was authentic. I think many people created assessment data out of whole cloth or manipulated data simply because we didn't care about it ourselves. We thought we were doing it for someone else. So in an online class, the more we can get students to have intrinsic motivation, the less likely they are to cheat. And maybe that's just common sense. When a student actually cares about learning, they're less likely to cheat or plagiarize. Well, what can we do about it? I mean, we can't necessarily control our students' motivation, but what we might be able to do is help students have that intrinsic motivation by doing things like focusing on quality instructor-generated content, things that connect the textbook and the publisher resources and the assignments with things that are happening in students' real lives, with their futures, with their majors, with things that they care about, by providing challenging ideas and questions that actually get students to care about the class. How do they see the class they're taking as part of a bigger whole, right? Part of their major, part of something that's going to matter in the long run. You know, making sure that assignments don't seem like busy work, that everything in the class is there for a reason. Again, things that might stoke that intrinsic motivation for students. You might also think about giving students some choice or autonomy in choosing the focus for assignments and assessments, right? So if a student is allowed to, make some choices, the act of making a choice and choosing may promote this intrinsic motivation in your class. Another extrinsic factor that promotes honesty. And I apologize for my slides here. I think what I want to say is, what's promoting honesty? When a student sees you as competent and caring, that's promoting honesty, right? When we move from this student seeing you as incompetent and uncaring to competent and caring, they're less likely to cheat. So, again, this may be more difficult to do in an online class, but students want to know that you care about them and they want to know that you're a competent teacher. How do we do this? I'm going to suggest focusing on instructor presence, focusing on authentic engagement and online teaching, illustrating your competence through quality instructor-generated content, the kind of meaningful and timely feedback that you give that shows that you're really engaging with students and that you care about their success. And I'll say that in my research, students aren't really differentiating between the course that you're teaching and you as the teacher. An online student is going to look at that course and they're going to see you in the course as almost one and the same. So if you want your students to see you as competent, you need to have a course design that has all the housekeeping, the course design that's locked down, that's not confusing, that's presenting material in a way that's meaningful and straightforward. All of those sorts of things that you can do to let students know that you care, to have a course site that makes sense and that's in order will probably go a long way to helping students view you as a competent, caring person. Again, if you have worked with me over the last few years, you've probably seen this research that I've done. So I've looked at online master teacher nominations, 2012 through 2015, 3 years of data, 2012, 13, 13, 14, 14, 15. I'll be looking at this year's online master teacher data later this spring semester. But the kinds of things that students say when they nominate a course or an instructor as an exemplary master teacher, they really notice when they make a personal connection with their teacher, when the teacher is friendly, warm, and caring, when they perceive that the teacher wants them to succeed, when they have a teacher that's passionate, that's excited, that's inspiring, right? These are the kinds of things that I imagine you want your students to think about you in your course. If a student thinks that you're passionate and you inspire them to learn, you're also demonstrating your expertise and professionalism through the content that you're creating. You're bringing the material to life. You're guiding them like a real teacher. I think there are lots of ways that we can try to make sure that students realize that we care about them. And if this is something you're interested in doing, reach out to me. I'm happy to help you with it. External factors that promote honesty. Well, if we want to talk about something that promotes cheating, high stakes assessments. Let me look at a case study really quick. You probably remember, I don't know, a year, 18 months ago, there was a big cheating scandal in Atlanta where a whole bunch of high school teachers and administrators were caught cheating on state mandated tests. And what they were doing was actually getting together and changing answers, and they were really doing a lot of things to make the students' test scores higher than they actually were. And I think this is a case of a high stakes assessment. It's a once a year test, and it's high stakes because the ramifications for the schools and the teachers when those test scores aren't high enough are extreme. Funding can get cut, schools can get rated an F, administrators can get fired, it can have to do with performance pay. Again, this is not a justification for cheating, but it is a possible explanation for why people might be more likely to cheat in certain cases. And when there are high stakes assessments, that's a time when people are more likely to cheat. So what can you do in your online class? You might simply decide to switch out a few high stakes assessments, right? The midterm and the final, or the two midterms and the final. You might move to mini comprehensive quizzes as opposed to those major exams. Or instead of grading a student on one research paper that's worth 50% of the grade, maybe you could break that paper up into its constituent parts and grade on a portfolio where each part of that portfolio is going to count toward that student's grade. Give more assignments, give a variety of assignments, quizzes, essays, projects, diagrams. If your class only has a few high-stakes assessments, students are more likely to cheat. Moving to a class with lower-stakes assessments is one way to motivate students to be less likely to cheat. As you'll see, I think there are other benefits to moving to lower-stakes assessments, but that's one of them. One of the things that many of us want to do in online classes, or some of us, is we want to do proctored exams. Proctored assessments of different kinds. So if you have a high stakes assessment, you might send the student to the testing center or ask them to find a proctored environment. That is a possibility, is to go with proctored assessments, either face-to-face proctoring or proctoring using a computer-mediated proctoring service, which we have here at Front Range. So that's something that you can certainly think about. As you'll see a little bit later, I have my own problems with proctored assessments because proctored assessments are by their nature high stakes, right? Because the student realizes I have to go and this is a high stakes environment. And if you can only proctor one or two of your assessments in the class, it may lead you to make those proctored assessments high stakes. And so, I don't know, it may be counterintuitive or maybe a catch-22 in that sense to think about proctored assessments as a solution here. I guess what we might find is when we proctor exams, you might get higher scores, which I think is an interesting, there's been a little bit of action research done here at Front Range, and I found it backed up in a few research studies I looked at elsewhere. Students score higher on proctored assessments versus the same assessment given in an online format. Now, I think what's interesting about that is, students are actually getting higher scores on the proctored environment compared to the take-home environment. So if you're someone who thinks that students are more likely to cheat at home, the fact that they get higher scores when they come to campus to take the exam kind of belies that, right? Why do they get higher scores when it's a proctored environment? Maybe the fact that they think it's high stakes means they study more. So if you're going to do proctored exams, from me to you as a coach, the reason to do it might be because your students will take the exam more seriously, and maybe not really because it has anything to do with the students being more honest when they're doing proctored exams. How about another external factor that we can look at? Performance-focused assessments. One thing that promotes cheating are assessments that are focused on one-time performance of a student. My case study here, again, you may remember from the news over the last 2 years or so, there was a scandal in the Air Force where officers who were stationed in nuclear missile silos were cheating on their quizzes. So these nuclear missile officers had to take tests as part of what they do to get promotions and to stay qualified to work in missile silos. And there was a case of cheating where many of these nuclear missile officers and their commanding officers were caught cheating. And let me tell you a little bit about why they said they cheated. Many of them said things like this: the test has nothing at all to do with whether I'm actually qualified to work in the missile silo. What I do down there is recorded 24/7. The test is a bunch of multiple choice and true-false questions, and the score I get on this test they saw as external and unrelated to their actual ability to perform and do their job. So what did they see? They saw this one-time assessment as something that was disengaged from what they could actually do. So if you move from performance-focused assessments to mastery-based assessments, you may help your students be less motivated to cheat. What does that mean? Well, if you're only giving one final exam that's worth 70% of the grade, that is a performance-focused assessment, because what you're really saying is, I'm going to give you one chance to show what you know. Where students may be thinking, that one chance, maybe because I'm not a good test taker, is simply not an accurate portrayal of what I can actually do, right? The outcomes that I've actually mastered. And so one of the suggestions is, if you can move more toward mastery-based assessments, you may help your students be motivated to be honest. So again, instead of giving 2 major exams, which are probably more performance-focused, you could move to a comprehensive quiz system where students are asked to master content and skills over the course of the semester, and what you're seeing is their progress over the course of the semester. You could do quizzing to mastery. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. More or less, that's where you say this: take the quiz as many times as you want until you get 100%. Right? What I want to see is that you actually master the material, not a snapshot of what you could do at one given point in time. A mastery-based focus in terms of essays probably has to do with students writing drafts, getting feedback on drafts, doing peer reviews on drafts, and then taking what they've learned on that draft and moving toward mastery of those skills when they're writing the final version. And then they even get to do a rewrite of that final version. I mean, what would that really mean? As someone who's teaching writing, what I'm really interested in is how good of a writer is my student by the end of the semester, not how good were they on any single writing assignment in the class. Or if you are someone who gives exams, maybe you would be willing to let students do exam corrections, right? Can they actually take the exam, the answers that they got wrong, and can they actually get those right? Can they move toward mastery of the content? Mastery is really more about what can the student do, or what does she know at the end of the semester. And I'm happy to talk to you more about this kind of pedagogically, or how you might think about redesigning your class to more of a mastery-based focus. This is something that I have adopted in my own class. This is a class that I co-teach with Carrie Mitchell. It's an online learning community. I used to give quizzes every week, and they're just on the content of my ethics class. I used to give students one chance to take the quiz. The quizzes were worth 10% of the course grade. And I gave quizzes because I wanted students to know the material, I wanted them to understand the content so they could participate in discussions and do the other things in the class that mattered. When I gave students one chance to take the quiz, I would often get students that skipped the quiz or that earned in the D and C range. I moved to a mastery-based quiz system. I used the same quiz, but I let students take the quiz multiple times with the goal that they master the quiz. Now, every time the student takes the quiz, all they see is their answers, how many they got right and how many they got wrong. They don't even know which ones they got right or wrong. Then they're supposed to go back to the text, study more, come back to take the quiz again. And they're supposed to take that quiz and go back to study as long as they need to until they can earn 100%. This is really a very typical score in my class now. Almost everyone scores 100% on my quizzes by Tuesday in the week. And I really think this helps students realize that they can understand what they know and what they don't know. So one of the factors we talked about previously was self-efficacy. Students may not even know whether they know the material or not. They may not have a good grasp of how competent they are with the material. One of the things I love about quizzing to mastery is by the time the student gets 100% on the quiz, they've read the material and gone back and forth enough times that they have a fairly good understanding of what they know and what they don't know. I think this really helps students with self-efficacy, and it also allows me to tell them what I'm really interested in is not one quiz score, but that I'm really interested in them learning the material. So I can't speak highly enough about quizzing to mastery. This has been a tremendously positive change in my own online classes. I also let them compare their level of mastery with other students in the class by showing the class average. And again, I think this helps them kind of have intrinsic motivation to care about the material in the class. They know what other students know. They know where the bar is. And I think this helps the class work as a cohort, because when the student sees a score like this, they know that when they go to discussion on Wednesday that they're going to be having conversations with everyone else in class that's also worked through the material and kind of earned their right to do the discussions. We'll move on to the next factor. Students are more likely to cheat when they don't know what cheating is, or where there's ambiguity around cheating, or where we don't take academic honesty seriously, or we don't communicate it effectively with students. So if we want our students to be more honest, we probably need to have clarity about what cheating is, to take it seriously, and to communicate effectively with students. So what can we actually do in our own classes? Be very clear about what you count as cheating in your classes, in your assignments, on your exams, on papers. Are students allowed to work together? Can they find materials on the internet? Can they use notes? Are they open book tests? Can they work together collaboratively? What do you count as cheating, and what does that mean for students? Tell students and show them by what you do in the class that you care about cheating, that you're going to be looking for it, that you're going to catch students if they do it. And don't just do this in your syllabus. Yes, have it in your syllabus, but take time out throughout the semester to reiterate that you care, to talk about why this matters. Use examples. Talk about the cheating scandal in the Air Force. Talk about the author or the journalist who dealt with plagiarism. Bring it up throughout the semester so students realize that you care about it, that you take it seriously, and that Front Range takes it seriously. Another external factor is when students can rationalize cheating as being necessary or morally acceptable, and when they have low self-efficacy. I'm going to skip this case study, other than to say that Dr. Lang offers this example where when little kids are given a task to complete that is extremely difficult for them to complete, almost all of them cheat at the task. Again, maybe not a surprise. When something is really difficult or almost impossible, but people want to accomplish it, if they can't do it, or if they don't know if they can do it or not, they're more likely to cheat. So what can we do to change the dynamic here and to promote honesty? Well, you can try to help students understand that cheating isn't necessary, or that it's unacceptable. And you can help students with their self-efficacy. So think about this. Some students may cheat even though they don't need to, because they lack the ability to comprehend how much they know or don't know. So if a student knows how to do the work, help them with self-assessment so they understand that they know what they're talking about, and then they won't feel like they need to cheat. Now, if they actually know they don't know, then you're going to have to help them realize that even if they know that they're not going to do well, it's unacceptable to cheat. So, what can we do about it? Set realistic standards. I'm not talking about dumbing things down, but if you set standards that are totally unrealistic, students may be likely to cheat. And make sure students understand what the standards are. I remember in college when I was taking, chemistry, the average class score was a 60%, but it was graded on a curve, so 60% became an A. That always boggled my mind as a student, but I at least knew that in this class, I wasn't expecting to get 100% on the exam, right? I understood that it was going to be a curved exam, and so I at least understood how my teacher was grading it. Allow students to practice. The more a student has practice with the material, that gives them the chance to know whether they understand it or not, to what extent they understand it or not. Offer formative assessments and give them feedback, or allow them to do self-assessments. Students should be confused. While they're learning the material, that's the part of the class where they're confused, and if you're creating assignments where you're catching their confusions at the appropriate time and giving them meaningful feedback to take them beyond that confusion, that's really one of the best things we can do as teachers, right? Capture that teachable moment, give the student the ability to understand what he or she knows and doesn't know. And you might want to let students know that cheating is lying. So I love this example. It's from a blog post by someone, middle school teacher named David Summergard. He caught a student cheating, and I'll just let you read this little anecdote. Student really didn't think it was that big of a deal, right, that he was copying someone else's homework. But when Summergard really looked at the student and said, you're a liar, right? I guess that makes you a liar. The student's attitude changed completely because the student didn't like being called a liar. So maybe this seems harsh, but what I love about this example is it evokes a moral context for that student in a way that simply hearing that he copied off of someone else didn't do. I get the luxury of being an ethics teacher, and so I get the luxury in my class of actually talking about cheating and lying as part of the class. We can talk about this guy Immanuel Kant in my class and all the ways that he would analyze why cheating and lying are wrong. And according to Immanuel Kant, everyone who cheats or plagiarizes, they are disrespecting themselves, they're disrespecting their classmates, they're selfish, they consider themselves special and outside of the rules. So maybe you don't have an opportunity to actually talk about Immanuel Kant in your class, but let me give you another little anecdote from Dan Ariely. I'm not expecting you to put the 10 Commandments on the wall in your classroom, but one of the examples that he uses in his book called The Honest Truth About Dishonesty is he sets up these conditions, right? Ariely is trying to decide what motivates people to cheat more or less. And so in one of the experiments, he had a set of math problems, and he was going to pay people for each math problem they got right. And most people will cheat on math problems when they don't have to turn in the answers. Just do as many problems as you can. Check your own scores, rip up your paper and throw them away. Now you tell me how many you got right and I'll pay you $1 per answer. So what did he do? One group, he just said, do as many problems as you can in 45 minutes and then rip up your paper and throw it away and I'll pay you. One of the other groups, he said, before you start working the math problems, I want you to try to remember and say out loud as many of the 10 Commandments as you can remember. Another of the groups, he just said, just think about the 10 Commandments. And what I really found intriguing about this result, can you guess what happened? The students who had to try to say out loud the 10 Commandments were extremely unlikely to cheat. They cheated at a very low level. And what's interesting is that applied to Christians, atheists, And most of the people, he said, regardless of their religion or non-religiosity, they couldn't remember very many of the Ten Commandments, but irregardless, they cheated at a very low level. And so did the students who were just asked to think about the Ten Commandments. And these were atheists, Muslims, Christians, Jews, agnostics. It didn't matter. I think Ariely speculates, and I guess I would speculate as an ethicist, it's just evoking the moral context, right? It's when you think about the Ten Commandments, you start thinking about right and wrong, good and evil, and when your brain is in that moral context, you're less likely to cheat. So, you may not want to ask your students about the Ten Commandments, but you might remind them that cheating is lying, or you might just say out loud before you give an exam or a paper, just remember that, cheating is morally wrong or something like that. Or you can do what some of our colleagues at CSU do and some of our colleagues around the country are doing. They ask students to put what they call an honor pledge on an assignment. And it is literally something like this. As you're turning in that assignment, or before you turn it in, or when you're about ready to ship that paper off, type this honor pledge and say, I, Eric Salah, pledge that I have neither given nor received unpermitted aid on this assignment or essay. You may just say, I want your promise in writing that you didn't cheat or plagiarize on this assignment. And I have read some anecdotes that this is fairly effective, if not very effective, at minimizing cheating. And another benefit to an honor pledge is when you catch a student cheating, if they've actually said explicitly that they didn't cheat, it's pretty clear that they knew it was wrong and they did it anyway. So if you want to hear more about honor pledges, I'm happy to talk to you about that. I'm going to move on and talk about some more external factors that promote honesty. If you can move from few formative assessments to many more formative assessments and opportunities for self-assessment, that's going to make your students more likely to be honest. So what is formative assessment? I've already mentioned it once. Formative assessment is the assessment of learning in progress. And this is opposed to summative assessments, right? Which are those kind of things we use at the end to measure how much a student has learned at the end of a unit or at the end of a course. So when you do formative assessments, you're assessing what the student is learning while they're learning it. And the intent of this formative assessment is so the student can self-assess where she is and so that you can offer meaningful feedback to help a student get where she needs to go. So the more formative assessments you can offer, the more likely it is that students will realize what they know and don't know, and that will probably make them less likely to need to cheat or be dishonest. So what can you do in your class? You could add online assessment techniques. I have an entire presentation. I'm going to be talking about this. So if you want to talk about how to add more formative assessments to your online class, reach out to me or just look for more communications from me this semester. Offer quizzes to mastery. I've talked about that. Offer self-assessments. Put rubrics in your class. Let your students grade themselves before they have to turn something in. Let students do peer review. Let them work on practice and self-assessment to understand where they are before they actually have to do those performance-based assessments. I'll let you stop and look at this if you want to, but I think this just gives you more of a sense of why we might want to do formative assessments and what kind of feedback we might be able to give and why on those formative assessments. Again, just a little bit more about online versus face-to-face classes and why it may be really important for you to add more formative assessments into your online class. In face-to-face classes, a lot of that formative assessment is happening automatically. We have to be more explicit about it in our online classes because a lot of those automatic formative assessment opportunities just don't exist in online classes. A little bit more about formative assessments, but I'm going to move on other than to say when you do formative assessments and when you give that meaningful feedback on that work in progress, that is one of the main things you can do that is experienced by students as instructor presence. When they get that feedback from you, that is authentic and meaningful, that helps them in that moment when they need it, that is experienced from the student as a teacher who cares, that's actually watching. They realize there's not just a computer teaching the class. And so I really think, again, you can probably tell I am a huge fan of formative assessments, and I really think you can't go wrong in focusing more of your time and effort on giving feedback on formative assignments in your class. If you want to do them, you're going to have to intentionally design them into your class. And again, I'm going to be talking more about those. If cheating is an accepted practice, if we are ineffective with dealing with it, if we're not buying in, if there's a coordinated effort to intervene, if we're not catching students the first time that they cheat, that's a problem. So what can we do about it? We can let students know that cheating is not normal, that it's not accepted. We can at least let students know that cheating is not more common in online classes, that you're expecting your class to be honest, and that you're going to be looking for it. You could say to students, it might be easier for you to rationalize cheating because you don't think there's a real person here who cares about you, but let me be sure to tell you that there is a person here who cares, and I don't want you to cheat. You can also buy into the process we have. You can make sure that students know that the online campus that we have, this virtual campus where students may never actually see anybody, that we still have a process. That there's a student with, student of concern form, that when you catch students cheating, you're going to turn them in, that you're going to be looking for cheating, that there's a dean of student services who's going to review these kinds of things. And if you are a full-time person, just realize that your part-time colleagues may be even more outside of the loop on these kinds of things. All of us who teach online might be more outside of the loop on these things. So, what can I say? Make sure that you understand the stand that Front Range has about cheating. Make sure that you talk about the student code of conduct in your online class. Make sure that you know what to do if you suspect a student of cheating, or if you catch a student cheating or plagiarizing. Make sure that you know what to do and actually do it. When I talk to the deans of student services, and I've talked to all 3 of them at Front Range, they tell me that they deal with a literal handful of cases of academic dishonesty each semester. Well, Front Range has something close to 30,000 students. If it's true that 75% of our students are cheating in a given year, we would expect that if we're actually catching students and processing them through the system, that our deans of student services would be literally overwhelmed with cases of cheating and plagiarism, and they're not. Now, what that tells me is most students are falling through the cracks. And it's unfortunate because the time to catch a cheater or the time to catch a plagiarizer is the first time that they do it. That's when it can be a teachable moment. That's when we can catch a student, when we can say, this is the first time you've done it. We can document it. There doesn't have to be an extreme sanction. But now that student knows that she's on record, and that if another person catches her cheating or plagiarizing and turns her in, that the ramifications are going to be more significant. So it's not always easy to have that conversation. We don't like confrontation with students, but help yourself and help your colleagues and our students by following through with the student discipline process. We want to catch cheaters. We definitely want to catch cheaters. But it's probably not going to be possible to catch everyone, and I guess I'll just say this. But one of the things that people ask me is, well, what are all the new ways? What are all the new ways that students are cheating? And it's pretty interesting. If you just go to Google and type in, how do students cheat or all these things, you can find all these videos created by students that help other students cheat. They're cheating using cell phones. They're cheating using, recordings and microscopic note cards and, you name it. I mean, think about this. Those nuclear missile officers in the Air Force were able to figure out how to cheat. Students are probably more motivated to figure out how to cheat and plagiarize than we will ever be in figuring out how to stop them. And this is an arms race, right? Every time we come up with an intervention, smart students are going to try to figure out a way around it. So, I guess from me to you, as your coach, as your colleague, how much time do you really want to spend being an expert on cheating? For me, it's not very much, right? I am really not that interested in trying to figure out all the specific ways students might cheat. We can talk about a few of them, but more or less, I really think what matters more is creating an assignment and a class where students aren't motivated to cheat in the first place. So, how can we design our assignments to make cheating difficult or impossible, and how do we catch cheating when it happens? I'm not going to read through all of these, but I'm going to just pause. You can pause the video and read these and reach out to me if you would like specific help on how to make online homework something that's less likely to cheat on. I guess the one I will talk about is, what's the goal of the homework? If students think it's busy work, there's probably not much you can do about stopping students from cheating. What about exams? Many of us give exams. What are ways that we can make our exams the sort of things that students are less likely to cheat on? Please pause and read. But I guess one of the things I'll say is you might want to consider proctored exams. I did already talk about why you might want to not want to do that. Maybe you also want to just say, why don't I just create an open book exam that I expect the student to be able to look at the book. You could make that exam, you can still make that an efficacious exam as long as you do it knowing that the student might have access to their materials. I already talked about this a little bit. I think there are pros and cons to proctoring in online classes. Let me talk about the pros. If you're proctoring, you're letting students know that you care about honesty, that you really want to know that they're doing their own work. It might reduce cheating, although I haven't seen any real data that shows that proctoring reduces cheating. Maybe it does. It might help students increase their perception of the integrity of online learning. In fact, when I ask my colleagues, why do you proctor exams, one of the main reasons we offer as teachers is, I don't do it for the students, I do it for my colleagues. I want them to think that my class has integrity. And if my colleagues think that students in online classes cheat a lot, one way to impress my colleagues is to offer proctored exams. And as I mentioned earlier, there's some action research that shows students may actually score higher on exam scores in a proctored environment versus a non-proctored environment, which again I think undercuts the fact that students are cheating in the first place. If they're scoring higher on the proctored exams, they must not be cheating as much as they could on the non-proctored exams. Here are some problems with proctoring. No matter what the class is, you're probably only proctoring one or two of your assessments. That may lead you to offer high-stakes assessments, which I've already said probably don't make a lot of sense if you're interested in demotivating students from cheating. And if you're only proctoring one or two of your assessments, everything else in your class is still fair game for cheating. So I personally think it's probably better just to create every assignment to try to demotivate students to cheat. Proctoring is expensive for students. If they can't come to the testing center, they pay for proctoring, and our students already pay more for online classes. It's logistically complicated. For Front Range, it's logistically complicated for students to make time to come to campus, to find a way to campus, or to find an offsite proctoring. It's difficult. It actually motivates students to go elsewhere where they don't have to do proctoring. I think proctoring probably fosters high-stakes performance-based assessments, which I don't think are a good idea in the context of trying to reduce cheating. And I already said that some students, in fact, many students, pick their institution based on whether they have to do proctored exams or not. Keep that in mind. Food for thought anyway. If you are someone who proctors and you want to do some action research and let me in on it, I would love to get more information about the impact on proctoring on student learning. Oops, sorry about that. If you want to know about web-based proctoring, I can tell you about the system we use here at Front Range. I think we're using ProctorU, but we did research into several different proctoring companies, and I'm happy to tell you, reach out to me or reach out to Chico Garcia if you want to talk about web-based proctoring for Front Range students. If you want to, talk about other kinds of external proctoring systems, I can talk about that with you too. Well, I'm almost an hour in, and I am going to take another 15 minutes or so to talk specifically about plagiarism. Everything else I've already said, plagiarism is really just a subset of academic dishonesty. So everything else I've talked about applies here, but I think because plagiarism is something special that many of us seem to care a lot about, and if you're someone like me teaching ethics, I don't even give exams, but I do give papers. So I may care more about plagiarism than cheating because my students really just don't have a great opportunity to cheat since I don't give exams, but they do have an opportunity to plagiarize. So you can look at this definition. Plagiarism is a form of academic dishonesty where an author uses another person's words or ideas without giving proper credit. Is this a sufficient definition? If you don't think it is, or if you do think it is, either way, you want to make sure that in your syllabus and in your class, you really talk about what you mean by plagiarism. I also might have you think about, do you think it's fair to say that there's a meaningful difference between intentional and unintentional plagiarism? I'm going to say there is a difference. If you want to disagree with me, that's fine. Reach out to me and let me know. But if you disagree, especially if you disagree, I think it might be worth hearing my argument for why I think it makes sense to differentiate what we can call misuse of sources, unintentional plagiarism, from actual plagiarism. A lot of my take on plagiarism echoes what you'll find at the WPA website. This is the Council of Writing Program Administrators. And so they make this distinction between what they call misuse of sources and what they call plagiarism. So for the writing program administrators, the Council of, misuse of sources is the careless or inadequate citation of ideas and words that are borrowed from another source. That's not plagiarism. That's misuse of sources. What's plagiarism? Plagiarism is submitting someone else's text as one's own, or attempting to blur the line between one's own ideas and or words and those borrowed from another source. They're both problems. We need to address both of them. Both of them are wrong. But what I'm going to talk about for the next 10 or 15 minutes is why does it make sense to think about a difference here, and how does peeling these apart help us actually deal with the actual problem we're facing? So, when we're talking about the misuse of sources, a couple of things to keep in mind. Realize that students may not actually know what the proper way to do the citations in their writing in your course. Students are not really considered college-level writers until they have completed English 122. You probably have students in your class that are taking English 121 as a co-requisite, right? They're probably in a CCR class. They haven't even taken English 121 yet. And even if they have, they may not have taken English 122 yet. Many of our students, they aren't completing English 122 until they're actually completing their associate's degree. So, if your students don't understand how to do citations, they're likely to mess up the citations in the class. What does this mean for you? If you care a lot about citations, you probably need to take the time in your class to actually help teach your students, what do you mean by citations? What do you mean by quotes? What sort of citations do you want your students to use? Do you want them to use MLA? Do you want them to use APA? Do you want them to use Chicago style? You probably want to actually help your students and realize that they may not know. They may be ignorant of what you want them to do. If you want your students to become skilled and ethical writers, we have to have this as a shared responsibility. You need to be part of the solution. As I already said, our students are becoming college-level writers as part of their career here at Front Range. Help your students. Be specific about what sort of citation style you want them to use, that you care about it, that it's going to be on the rubric, that you're going to give them points for it, that you're going to deduce points if they don't do citations properly, and give students help. Point them to resources. Send them to the Writing Center. There are writing centers on all the campuses. There's an online writing center at Front Range. There are lots of other online resources that might help students actually be able to use sources properly. Consider the misuse of sources as a teachable moment. It's not a case of academic dishonesty. Your student is just making a mistake. So again, if you have a paper, you might have a rubric that gives 10% of the paper grade to proper citations. Students could lose points for not citing properly. Maybe you want to look at citations and a draft and give students a chance to fix them. Maybe you want to ask students to send their draft paper through turnitin.com as a way to check their citations as a self-assessment before they actually turn the paper in. Require students to collect sources. Require them to have an annotated bibliography. review the drafts and the citations before the papers due, or have students do peer reviews on citations so they can actually learn how to do them properly. I'll also say, note that there are cultural differences. If you have students from other countries or students from other backgrounds, they may come loaded with other cultural norms about use of sources and whether they should cite or not cite, and all of those kinds of things. I'll also say that our culture's understanding about citations and originality are changing. You may not like that we're moving into a world where people are mixing and matching and copying and pasting, mixing up, but our students are probably coming to us, especially our younger students, from this context in a world where they may not see the same natural distinctions between originality and creativity and borrowing from sources. So again, the extent that you want to take this seriously, let your students know and help them do the right thing. I already mentioned Turnitin.com. It is not plagiarism detection, and so I think that's a misnomer. It is originality detection. If a student writes a research paper, if they're quoting someone, their Turnitin is not going to come back 100% original. In fact, if a research paper is 100% original, it means there are no quotes in it. One of the best ways to use Turnitin.com, as far as I'm concerned, is to use it as part of the writing process so a student can self-assess their citations. 20% of their paper may be unoriginal, and they may actually help the student realize, yes, I have 20% of my paper as quotes, and Turnitin.com can clarify for them, did they do their quotes correctly? Are there things in their paper that aren't original that maybe they should have quoted? And again, if they're writing a research paper, it's not going to be 100% original. Become familiar with outside resources. Again, we have our own Front Range online writing center. Students can turn in papers electronically. You can find that in your D2L widget in your online course, but they can also go to the OWL, Online Writing Lab from Purdue. It's one of my favorites. There are also a host of online citation and bibliography tools. One of them is EasyBib. I guess what I'll say about this is your students may be using web resources to do their citations anyway, right? So they're out there already. If they're out there already, maybe you want to point your students to them. I'm going to go quickly here. There's this really cool project. You can just Google it. It's called the Citation Project. The takeaway that I got from this is, even when we're asking our students to do citations, they may not really be learning the lesson we hope they're learning. The Citation Project analyzed all these papers, almost 2,000 individual citations, and one of the most interesting findings were that only 6% of the citations came in the form of summary. Almost all of them were direct quotes or what should have been direct quotes. As someone who teaches ideas and philosophy, I'm really more interested in whether my students can summarize the ideas in their own words. Since only 6% of the students were doing that, it may be that they didn't understand the stuff in the first place. They were just doing the citations, right? I need to do 6 quotes, so I'm going to find 6 quotes. And what's really interesting is almost half of the citations came from the first page of the source. So let me ask you this. Why are you requiring citations? If most of the citations are in the form of quotes, and if 50% of the quotes your students are offering you are coming from the first page of their source, are they really learning the lesson that you want them to learn? Or are they only jumping through a hoop that you've set up for them? I'm not telling you not to ask your students to do a research paper, but I am asking you maybe to think about, why are you asking for that research paper? And what outcomes are you hoping your student gets? It very well may be that your student never read beyond the first page of that source, and the only reason they read it in the first place was because they knew they needed to find a quote. If that's the case, I'm pretty confident that you're not actually meeting that goal. You may be meeting the goal that your students know how to find a source, but they may not actually be learning anything from the source. If you want to help your students with online research and citation skills, You can reach out to me. Again, I co-teach an Ethics and English 121 class with Carrie Mitchell. We help our students use online databases by teaching them how to do that with screencasts. And what we find is every single one of our students becomes proficient at using online databases to find relevant research and articles for their class assignment. Online students can do it. In fact, our online students outperform our face-to-face students. So if you want to actually help your students become proficient doing research using online databases and in doing the citations properly, they can do it. 100% of them can do it. And I'm more than happy to help your students accomplish this feat. So what about plagiarism, right? We've helped students do sources. Now let's talk about actual cheating. This is where they're stealing ideas from other people, or they're trying to pull the wool over your eyes, or they're copying wholesale paragraphs from something, or they're buying a paper on the internet, where they're not doing quotes at all, where they're actually trying to make you think that they wrote that paper when they actually stole those words from somewhere else. What do we do about that? Number one, make sure your students know what plagiarism is. And it may be helpful to say, there's this thing called misuse of sources, and that's bad, but I'm going to help you get better at that. And then there's this other thing called plagiarism, and that's just blatant stealing and dishonesty. And that's something that I'm going to, take you to the Dean of Students for. If you can take the pressure off the student feeling like every time they don't put a quote mark in the right place, they've committed plagiarism. Plagiarism is a loaded term. Students hate being accused of plagiarism. And so I think we can unload that term and call misuse of sources what it is, something students can learn to do better, as opposed to plagiarism, which is this intentional act of deception. So make it clear. I'm going to catch you if you plagiarize. You're going to be sanctioned if you plagiarize. 100% of students who plagiarize, I'm going to catch you if you do it. And if you do, we're going to go through the discipline process. Help students understand and guard against plagiarism. There are online tutorials. You can just do a Google search for plagiarism tutorial. I know a couple of our colleagues here at Front Range, they actually require their students to go online, complete an online plagiarism tutorial, get the certificate, and send it into their instructor. You can have them do that. You can point them to a tutorial that you agree with. You can, I love this idea, assign papers on topics that can't be plagiarized. What's the easiest way to make sure your students aren't going to plagiarize? Give them a topic that is impossible to plagiarize. Tie your paper to a current event. Tie your paper to something that happened last month. It's unlikely that the paper mills have yet created papers that are dealing with something that happened last month. Have your papers tie or connect to specific things addressed in your class. Again, it's probably unlikely that it'll be easy for them to find a source that echoes something that you particularly talked about in your class. Or focus on unique perspectives or audiences. Have your students do their writing aimed at a particular audience, like 6th grade science students, or the PTA, or your legislator, or whoever. Again, if the student has to focus their paper stylistically to a given audience, it's going to be really difficult for them to find a way to plagiarize that paper. I'll also say this. If you're focused on something the student cares about, maybe that unique thing that you talked about in class, they have intrinsic motivation and they're not going to feel the need to cheat on it. Give them some choice. Come up with something interesting that they might actually care about, not the stock, boring paper topics that are a dime a dozen, right? Give them something interesting to write about. Give them a few choices so they can find authentic, intrinsic motivation. And I'll also say this, it's a lot more fun as the teacher to get to read papers that students really cared about. I'm going to back up a slide. I've already gone 1 hour and 14 minutes. In my own online class, I've said, I co-teach an online English 121 ethics class. We never have plagiarized papers because our papers are focused on ethical topics that we talk about in class, and we frame our 2 major papers as advice columns. Well, there's nowhere online that students are going to be writing the advice to Jake paper, right? Because it's just something we do in class. And I'll say this, it is so fun to read those papers that are interesting. I mean, I have graded plenty of papers in my more than 20 years of teaching, and there's nothing more boring than reading 20 papers on whether or not abortion should be legal or illegal. It's an important topic, but wow, reading the same arguments over and over and over and over can get kind of stale. So come up with something interesting that still meets your objectives. The students will be happier with it, and I can almost guarantee you will too. Number 5 here, focus on the whole paper writing process instead of just the final product. We talked about this an hour ago. If you only focus on grading that final research paper and it's worth 50% of the grade, and you haven't looked at a draft, you haven't looked at an annotated bibliography, you haven't had students do a peer review and a second peer review and turned in a prospectus, you're just really inviting them to plagiarize. But if they have to do all that work along the way to create that portfolio, to turn in things along the way, for one thing, if you're checking all the things along the way, you're really de-incentivizing them to plagiarize because it's almost harder to cheat than it is to actually just do the work. And you're also focusing on formative assessment. You're catching the student before they make the big mistakes that's going to lead them astray. And maybe you want to consider an honor pledge for your essays. Again, just have them tell you, I didn't plagiarize. What do you do when you catch someone cheating? Don't take it personally. It'll be difficult not to, but try not to take it personally. Make sure you know what the policies are at Front Range. Review them in the Student Code of Conduct. Talk to me, talk to your online lead, talk to your online chair. Don't wait until it happens. Find out now. But if it does happen, before you respond, make sure you know the context that you have. Know what you can do, know what you can't do. Get advice from someone. You don't have to take the advice, but you can ask, what would you do, Eric? You've talked to lots of instructors over 20 years. What's the kind of typical thing someone does when students misuse sources or plagiarize? Am I allowed to expel the student from class? Should I give them a 0? What are some options? Address academic dishonesty right away. I don't mean immediately, seek help, get some advice, but don't wait a week, right? Talk to them right away. Even if you just have a suspicion, deal with it right away. Talk to the student one-on-one, make that first contact as informal as possible to see if you can deal with it before it escalates into a huge problem. Keep copies of everything, right? Whether it's an exam, homework, an essay. If you're going to take this through the discipline process, you want to document everything. Follow through with formal procedures. You can decide to deal with a student in class. Yes, my student plagiarized this paper. I've decided to give the student a 0, allow the student to do a rewrite for a 10% deduction. I don't want the dean of students to do anything, but I am going to still fill out the student of concern form, and I'm going to make sure that this is on record with the dean of student services. So if the student plagiarizes next semester, that instructor will have a track record. So you can do what you want, but even if you deal with something informally, it is still worth going through the formal processes so you can help your colleagues and that student by making sure we document when we've caught a student and caught them in that first time offense and treated it as a teachable moment. I think as a teacher, it makes sense for you to consider every act of cheating as a teachable moment. You may not feel like treating it that way, but we are teachers and they are students. And I think if you frame it as a teachable moment, it'll be easier to be objective and to extract yourself and to realize that the student is not cheating because they hate you. They're probably not cheating because of anything about you, right? You just happen to be there when it happens. So if you think about it as a teachable moment, what can the student learn from this, and how can I help that student find this as a teachable moment? And even if bad things happen in terms of the ramifications of the sanctions, that I've tried to encapsulate this as a teachable moment. Consider your sanctions. Consider what Front Range will allow you to do, and consider what best serves student success. So I'll leave that up to you to decide what best serves student success, but giving the student a 0 may not be the best thing. That's something I'm happy to talk to you about. If you're still with me, I just want to say I think everything we've talked about, I could really say is really we're trying to create this virtuous classroom. We're trying to create an environment where we have de-incentivated, if that's a word, demotivated. We've tried to take away as many of the external and contextual factors that might lead a student to be dishonest. We've tried to create an environment that promotes honesty, and we hope that that environment will allow the student to exhibit these personal, honest factors. I don't think there's one magic bullet, but I think if we can look at multiple factors, we can try to create an online learning environment and the environment within our own classes where students are less likely to cheat and plagiarize in their classes. Everything I've talked about, I really think of as win-win. If you know me, you know that I am not about zero-sum game thinking. It's not about win-lose. Everything we do to help students be more honest just makes them learn more. It makes a better class. It makes a class that's more fun to teach. Everything we've covered today, all the suggestions to minimize cheating and plagiarism, just promote student learning. Even if you don't care about student cheating, even if you don't think it happens, there's nothing we've talked about today that I don't think will actually make your class a better class for your students and for you. I want to end on this slide. One of our colleagues, I'm going to go ahead and name her, Ayelet. She teaches economics. She's the econ online lead. I hope I'm not misquoting her. So if she's watching this, she can let me know that I'm saying something wrong, but I'm pretty sure I have this right. I don't know, more than a year ago, I went to a presentation where Ayelet talked about her Economics 201 class and how she moved from a previous version of her class where she focused on a midterm and a final to a class that had 12 cumulative quizzes and a final. And here's the outcome. She did not do this because she was worried about her students cheating. She made this move based on the fact that she wanted her students to learn more and she wanted to have a better class experience for herself and for her students. So what did she do? She threw out the midterm and she went to, maybe she might have had 2 midterms and a final. She threw out the midterms and she replaced the midterms with 12 cumulative comprehensive quizzes. What were the outcomes? Students learned more. They actually did better on the final exam, which was the same as from previous semesters, than students did when they had the 2 midterms. So moving from those 2 midterms that were performance-based, high stakes, to 12 quizzes, students actually learned more, and that was really important to Ayelet because she actually wanted her students to learn something in the class. And so moving to the cumulative quiz model helped her students learn more. It actually used less class time, which I found intriguing because when she gave midterms, she had to devote entire class periods to midterms and then other class periods to handing back and going over midterms. So she calculated that it actually took less class time to do the quizzes than the exams, which for her was important. Students had less anxiety. This was important too. Those high-stakes midterms caused her students a lot of anxiety, a lot of angst, a lot of worry, and that came out in class in their dissatisfaction with class and their unhappiness in class. So moving from 2 midterms to these 12 cumulative, students were just happier with it. And she was happier too. So what I love about this example is all of the things that Ayelet didn't have anything to do with her wanting students to cheat less. I imagine they probably did cheat less, assuming they were cheating in the first place, but she didn't do it because she wanted her students to cheat less, but I think it had efficacy anyway. I'm out of time. I guess if you're still with me, an hour and 24 minutes in, I guess I had a lot to talk about today. I hope this is useful to you. Please reach out to me. I will offer any of you a worthless point of extra credit. If you're watching this, go ahead and shoot me an email, eric.salahub@frontrange.edu. If you just tell me that you watched this, you'll have my adoration, and I'll give you a point of extra credit, and who knows, maybe I'll give you a gold star or something else. Thanks a lot for your time, and if, again, reach out to me if you've got questions or concerns, if a student of yours is cheating, or if you have ideas to help me make this presentation better, I'd love to hear that too. Thanks, everybody.